Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 721. Finally here to court death. Thus before the Hongjun Pagoda managed to digest all this heaven-earth spiritual qi, it was unlikely to be of any use to Jun Moxie. This is, dang it. Of all times, you choose to go on strike on me now. Don't you know that we are only an hour away from when the battle begins? Why did you eat like a country bumpkin who had never eaten anything decent in life and finally entered the city? You only stopped when you ate till your belly was about to burst. Although it was temporary, this is too ridiculous. Jun Moxie criticized and grumbled internally. Hongjun Pagoda remained still and let Jun Moxie continue running his mouth. If it could speak, it will definitely shoot back disdainfully. Feck. Isn't it all because your incompetent ass made me like this? Who would be able to take it as you keep drawing blood but don't feed me? If you had fed me properly every day, would I even have to overeat now? Furthermore, it's not that I overate, it's just indigestion. Blaming me instead of yourself. How could you be this shameless? You heartless bastard. Scolding didn't work. And hitting couldn't be used. Jun Moxie was completely out of tricks, so he could only come to terms with it. A situation like this was definitely temporary, so he could only pray that this fella can finish digesting as quickly as he could, and hopefully didn't get some sort of stomach ulcer just from this. I'll let you take a temporary holiday then. God dang it. Just because I don't have a butcher I'll have to eat a unskinned pig? Watch me make a splash with my own real capabilities. I can still wreak havoc and turn this world upside down. Jun Moxie concealed himself and stood there, experiencing the cold, merciless winds. Looking down at the smooth surface beneath the mountain. He muttered internally. It's almost time. Why haven't those A** shoals arrived yet? What if the peak collapses before they arrive? This mountain peak is at risk of collapsing any moment with no solid foundations. It'll be a complete tragedy if he still had to use his own strength to hold and support it till the enemy arrives. Just when he worried, whooshing sounds could be heard. Over 10 people cut through the misty dawn at incredible speeds. Everyone in this group was highly skilled, their steps firm and fast. They were people from the 3 Holy Lands. And the person leading this group at the front was Chu Wuqing. He commanded in a hurried tone, "Hurry! Faster! Faster! There! And there! Go camouflage yourselves and wait for my command. At the sound of my loud whistle, charge out. We have to catch them off guard. Cause the greatest possible damage at the beginning." Everyone else nodded, but no one spoke. Followed by a couple of whooshes, everyone sought for a location to hide in. Jun Moxie wasn't sure if it was a good or bad thing, but one person had picked the spot Jay was standing at as his hiding spot. Carefully laying down, he stuck his head up to look around before retracting it again. This hiding spot was too magnificent. His head was right at Jun Moxie's crotch. Jun Moxie only had to stretch his hand out, grab the person's neck, and strangle him to death. Or Jun Moxie could just squat down slightly and his bum would be seated right on his neck. This guy just had to stretch his neck a little and he would have an extremely intimate contact with a certain private body part. Jun Moxie didn't know whether to laugh or cry at having someone stick their head in his crotch while he was invisible. This brother is too good at hiding. To hide in such a place is making it extremely convenient for me. But Jun Moxie was not able to do anything to him currently. To be able to see and touch. But have to hold himself back. Jun Moxie was annoyed and frustrated. At this moment, This person randomly turned around and faced the sky, a satisfied look upon his face. Burying his nose under Moxie's crotch, he even took deep breaths, opening his mouth widely. His eyes turned into crescents as he commented, "This air here sure is fresh. If I were capable of farting at my own will, you would instantly find it unfresh." Jun Moxie thought angrily. Watching the wide mouth that was opening and closing beneath him, Jun Moxie thought, if I suddenly have the urge to pee, it'll all go into this guy's stomach. Not a single drop would go to waste. Naturally. If it's diarrhea, this person might be worse off than eunuch Zhu Lao. Forcefully fighting the urge to strangle this person to death and the tempting thought of taking a leak right there, Jun Moxie let out a sigh of resignation and got ready to leave. Before leaving, young Master Jun was still not willing to walk away just like that. Jun Moxie began to circulate the qi in his body, heading up before going down, till it reached the dantian, went into the spleen channel of the taiyin foot. With a slight tightening of the rectum, he released a silent fart. As the saying goes, a loud fart doesn't smell, but a smelly fart doesn't sound. Under the careful control of Jun Moxie, this extreme fragrance entered the mouth of the guy below with a whoosh, not a single bit going to waste. With another whoosh, young master disappeared into thin air. The person below was still taking in deep breaths through his mouth that was open wide like a satisfied toad. Suddenly, an odd and extremely pungent odor hit him right in his mouth, causing him to choke. An odd flavor spread across his tongue and he gagged, feeling as if his stomach was about to overturn and he was almost going to vomit. Chu Wu Qing transmitted over coldly. Who? Who is it? The guy pinched his nose and replied with much difficulty. Master Chu, please simmer down. It was me. Cui Ningshi. You son of a beach. Why are you so useless? Why are you gagging? Did you fecking eat a fart? What sort of timing is this? If you don't believe that I'll kill you, go ahead and gag one more time. Chu Wu Qing cursed harshly. Cui Ningshi was a submissive person, so he did not dare to make any noise. But he was reminded by Chu Wu Qing's words. He was hit by another wave of nausea after swiping his tongue in his mouth and fought the urge to gag again. It is really the flavor of a fart. This is so weird. Where did this disgusting odor come from with such strong winds? He looked around suspiciously but could not find anything, so he lowered himself again and continued hiding. Jun Moxie had just left where he was standing when he saw Mo Xiaoyao strolling with all the other remaining experts from 3 holy lands, all high and mighty. Everyone had a serious expression on, their strong killing intent and aura rushing up to the skies and blowing the white clouds away. They're here. They're finally here. Finally here to court death. Jun Moxie's heart was hit by a wave of excitement and adrenaline. What's going on? Why has the enemy not arrived yet? Mo Xiaoyao turned around and asked in confusion. It is already almost time of the agreed timing. Why hasn't the other party made a move yet? Is there more than what meets the eye? That's right. They came from so far away. How could they not have made a move yet? They should at least have some sort of action done by now. The skies should have been filled with xian beasts that could fly by now. Jia Qingyun was just as confused. Could they be making a joke out of us? Mo Xiaoyao's face darkened, his eyes oozing with killing intent. He gritted his teeth and said, "We'll wait for a while more. If they do not reach by the agreed timing, we shall retreat. They are the ones who did not keep to their word. If it's embarrassing for anyone, it's for them." All right. Jia Qingyun nodded heavily. He turned around and made a gesture to question Chu Wuqing on the state of the preparations. Chu Wuqing signaled back that all was ready. Thus, they settled down to meditate at the foot of the sword peak, peace and serenity across their faces. To be able to maintain such a peaceful state of mind before a huge battle was enough to show how mentally prepared they were, not putting the battle on their minds at all. Only experts had this level of extreme magnanimity. On Jun Moxie's side, all preparations were ready. It was the most crucial timing now. Everything needed to be fast. So fast that there would be no time for any response. He went underground with a whoosh, exerting all the power of earth he had accumulated in the free time out in one shot. And at the same time, he spread the deep blue-colored power of water all around, causing all the energy that was trapped within to explode outward. As quick as lightning, he made his way to the center of the ground. The blood of yellow flame turning into a sword with the glow of a mystical dragon. With one single sword, the layers of Xian ice underground that were of 10,000 years of age were completely destroyed. Then he rose upward, utilizing the highest speed of the yin-yang escape technique, flying like a shooting star. At the sword peak, Mo Xiaoyao suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Jia Qingyun. "Old Jia, do you feel something?" he asked. Jia Qingyun frowned doubtfully. "It seems as if there is some movement underground, but it's hard to explain what it is. Or maybe there is a small avalanche somewhere. Our war cries yesterday sent tremors all over and created some avalanches in some places. Perhaps the movement now might be related." Mo Xiaoyao hummed in agreement. He turned around and took a look at the snow peak that was not too far away. He exclaimed, "This sword peak is truly worthy of the name. Sword peak, looking at it as a whole. It really looks like a sword. A gigantic one. I wonder what sort of godly creature would be able to utilize a stunning heavenly sword as such." Jia Qingyun laughed. "Brother Mo, it is just a mountain. But it really looks too much like a sword." Mo Xiaoyao chuckled. Suddenly, his face darkened as he tilted his head backward and looked at the tip of the sword peak. He frowned and asked, "Why does it look like it's slanted? Is my eyesight that bad?" Jia Qingyun laughed. "Haha. Brother Mo, let me reiterate. It is a huge mountain. How could it be as straight as a sword?" Just as this sentence was finished, before the laughter could cease, huge pieces of snowflakes started to fall from the sky. The weather here sure is peculiar. The sun is so bright. There are no clouds. But it starts snowing out of the blue. And in such a rush. Such large pieces. Xiao Tianyu remarked. Could this be the unique weather of Blizzard Silver City? Everyone started laughing. If it's not like this, could it still be called Blizzard Silver City? That's true indeed. Xiao Tianyu also joined in the laughter. But the scenery here is truly unique. Before the sentence could be finished, a series of rumbling sound came from below, and even the ground seemed to begin to tremble. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 722. The collapse of the snow-covered sword peak. Only then was everyone really surprised. They all stood up and looked around. Everyone's face were filled with confusion and worry. The trembling became stronger, and so did the rumbling noises. The entire mountain began to shake. What's going on? What's happening? Everyone started to gather together and ask around. Mo Xiaoyao's pupil shrank as he looked at the sword peak. He shouted, "Everyone! Run! The sword peak is going to collapse." His eyes were staring so intensely and focused on the peak that they were about to pop out of their sockets. He realized that the sword peak was falling toward them at an extremely slow pace. Despite it being slow, it was clearly visible, like a giant falling down. But it was too late. A long and loud cry ripped through the air, so intense it cut through the heavens. A voice as clear and sharp as a sword shook the heavens and the earth, echoing in the mountain range, almost as if it was declaring to the world, driving out all Xian beasts from Tianfa, the collapse of the snow-covered sword peak. The oath is now be broken. The Dongfang family reigns forever. The robust cry echoed for a long time. At this moment, it was even louder than the loud commotion of the collapsing peak. As Mo Xiaoyao's pupils shrunk further from fear, catching sight of a small white figure suddenly shooting out of the sword peak with a shrill cry. In a blink of an eye, it shot back toward at the sword peak like a meteor, bursting the skies with dazzling sword light. As if a blinding sun appeared midair and flew at the sword peak, knocking at it crazily. There was no hesitation in this knocking, and coupled with the gradual and slowly collapsing mountain peak, it sent shivers down one's spine, as if the world were coming to an end. It was as if the entire world was thrown into absolute disaster, yet it seemed like everything had stopped moving. Loud noises could be heard everywhere, but it seemed as if Mo Xiaoyao couldn't hear a thing. His entire soul was intimidated by the figure and sword light that had appeared suddenly. The light was almost like the wrath of a furious god that could easily destroy the entire universe. That crisis of life and death weighed that upon everyone's heart. A loud shout ripped across the air, collapse. Sword peak. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head to regain his senses, shouting desperately in a voice that had turned shrill and sharp from fear. Everyone! Run! Boom! The white figure had crashed heavily into the sword peak that was already falling down, becoming the straw that broke the camel's back. A mushroom of clouds appeared between the sword peak and flew straight to the skies. Countless rock pieces flew out, from small pieces to large pieces in a blink of an eye. The sword peak that was collapsing slowly suddenly increased in speed, like a tractor that was slowly moving transforming to a Ferrari on full acceleration. It fell toward the tiny speck-like people mercilessly. This white figure was Jun Moxie. He reached the waist of the mountain and began his operation. Shooting out, flailing his sword around, both his arms turning into hurricanes. The blood of yellow flame awakened along with his agitated emotions, and sword energy shook the heavens like the roar of a dragon and tiger. In a blink of an eye, thousands and 10,000s bursts of sword energy shot toward the enormous mountain body. Jun Moxie kept his sword, channeling earth-shattering energy in his palms as he fired away at the mountain. As if in a single breath, hundreds of attacks fell heavily at the same spot. As if a massive, heavy hammer repeatedly hit the same location. This was the wrath of thunder. This was the might of heaven and earth. Jun Moxie had the cultivation level of a 2-level venerable now, coupled with the power from the art of unlocking heaven's fortune. Even if there was no damage to the ground beneath the sword peak, he could still make a hole out of it. Furthermore, now that he had completely hollowed the ground beneath the sword peak, it was as sturdy as a building with no solid foundation. What more, when the sword peak was falling in the direction where Mo Xiaoyao and the rest were, Jun Moxie had already dug a vast and endless pit. With the combined efforts of the top and the bottom, the collapsing sword peak that had suddenly increased in speed fell down with a loud bang. Innumerous boulders began to roll down from the mountain. Like meteorites, they fell and crashed toward the ground. Those left on the ground only felt as if the originally blue skies suddenly turned dark in an instant. The height of the sword peak was in the thousands. And when it fell down like this, the area it covers was naturally endless. Furthermore, with the falling parts, the area that it covered seemed to have doubled. Mo Xiao Yao and his party were originally situated near the foot of the sword peak. Now with the speed the peak was collapsing at, it was highly unlikely that those 500 people could get out of this death circle before the peak fell, even with all their saintly cultivation and training. When faced with such a terrifying encounter, everyone from the three holy lands began to run for their lives, regardless of those who had arrived to ambush or those who had arrived later. They were all like ducks being chased, running for their lives in a crazed state of mind. Who would still be bothered with principles and mission at this juncture? Escaping for their lives was the most important thing right now. Everyone looked hysterical and their hearts were completely taken over by the despair and fear of impending death. Despite everyone clearly knowing that their resistance was futile, they still continued to run. Humans will always treasure their lives. Even when faced with a hopeless situation, they will still resist with all their might. If they can live for a minute more, or even a second more. Whatever manners, status, position, image had all been tossed out of the window, only begrudging that their parents didn't birth to them with more legs. When faced with a terrifying force from the natural environment, no human would be able to stop it. Even if you had the highest cultivation level or skills, you might not be able to survive an ordeal like this. Mo Xiao Yao and Jia Qingyun were about to vomit blood. To think that we were set up and driven into such a pathetic state. Despicable. Shameless. Outrageous. Dirty. Although they were still unclear on how one could shake a huge ancient mountain with their strength alone, but it was definitely not a coincidence. The enemy not appearing at the agreed timing, while those that had arrived on time were subjected to a deadly disaster like this. And that peculiar white figure. Everything pointed to a fact, this was an enemy set up. This theory was definitely valid. We really ate a huge disadvantage this time. As the two ran with their might, they angrily regretted and chided themselves, we obviously aware that the enemy had no good intentions in asking for a battle, but thought they were too conceited in their own strength and abilities to come forth without any worry. We stuck our necks under the enemy's chopper and were basically asking to be slaughtered. Mo Xiao Yao was so distraught that he puked blood. He was confident that his wit and intelligence were unparalleled. But to make a mistake like this and allow himself to be manipulated by the enemy without realizing it. They should have retreated the moment he noticed that the enemy had yet to arrive when they had. He noticed something was off, but did not take note of it. But this turn of events was too ridiculous. Could you even blame this on me? Who the feck knew that a good old mountain would collapse just like this? What sort of methods are capable of causing this horrifying disaster? Am I possibly dreaming? Hey! Even if it is a nightmare, it mustn't be this frightening. Mo Xiao Yao almost felt like crying. What sort of bad luck is this? Under normal circumstances, when would a venerable even be needed to make an appearance? Any random great master would be enough to handle everything. But right now, he brought a whole bunch of great masters and venerables out, only to be met with a pathetic, tragic end like this. He was still planning to finish Tianfa and the Jun family off quickly and returning back to the mountains immediately to prepare for the incoming battle. But he didn't expect to be crushed by the opponent with a mountain and face the possibility of death. Am I really not going to survive this and become meat pancakes for real? He raised his head to look at the looming mountain peak that was getting bigger and bigger. Mo Xiao Yao finally cried. Looks like it's wishful thinking hoping to turn into meat pancakes. I'm going to be smashed completely, turning into minced meat directly. Gadang it. You don't even need to mince the meat for dumplings. We are going to be instant ones for your use. As a 4th level venerable expert, a death like this is too aggrieving. I can't resign to an end like this. Jia Qingyun, who was running, suddenly stopped in his tracks and shouted as if he were mad, "Everyone! Stop running! The area the mountain covers is too big. It's impossible for us to escape before getting crushed. Everyone gather at a spot and channel all our power to fight this disaster. We will only have a possibility of survival if we find a way out. If we all continue running in different directions, we are all going to die." His voice was fast and hurried. And just from listening to him, everyone felt as if he were about to throw up blood. Mo Xiao Yao was awoken instantly and started to join in the shouting. The two were 4th level venerables with many years of Xian Qi cultivation. With such conscientious effort in shouting, their voices were heard instantly despite the commotion in the surroundings. But hearing was one matter, and following was another. In an instant, 300 people flew over to their sides instantly, but the remaining continued to run amok like headless flies, doing things their own way. Especially those who were running the furthest were better skilled in agility. Naturally, they believed that they could escape death with their level of abilities. In a life or death situation, who cared about venerable commands? They continued to run on their own, ignoring the commands from Mo Xiao Yao and Jia Qingyun as if they were farts. Some others were clearly shaken by this horrific turn of events and were unable to react if they had heard it. At this moment, bang! The entire ground shook. The first large boulder had finally landed onto the ground. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 723. A poem of the collapse of heaven and earth. Boulders and rocks continued to rain from the sky and layers of thick snow flew up due to the impact of the ground shaking, creating a series of gigantic explosion plumes. A spectacular sight. Countless boulders fell like mighty raindrops, followed by the entire mountain body, looming overhead and blocking the entire sky. In the eyes of those below, the entire world had just turned completely dark and eerie. Mo Xiao Yao let out a loud cry, his beard flying in the wind, stumbling as he got up. His sword glowed with a blinding light as he stabbed ruthlessly into an incoming boulder. Boom! That rock exploded into tiny stone chips that flew across the air. In that instant, with over 10 strikes, 10 gigantic boulders disappeared from sight. Seeing that such a method was effective, everyone began to do the same, waving their weapons about, not willing to just sit still and wait for death when there was a glimpse of hope. In an instant, a huge amount of energy was unleashed, coloring the sky with countless fireworks, creating a dazzling sight. All these highly skilled, fearless venerable experts began to battle for their lives against these lifeless boulders. And all their eyes were red. Everyone gather together. Remember to reserve a portion of your energy when you strike. Aside, 50 of you fire away at full power at the ground. You must create a pit before the entire mountain lands. The bigger the better. Use all your energy. When the mountain hits, everyone throw your weapons and rush into the pit. Use all your power to dig deeper into the ground. Then link hands and form a protective circle to share the burden of the pressure from the mountain. Only like this we may still have a chance of survival. Our hearts unite as one in the face of life and death to pull through this together. Mo Xiao Yao shouted with all his might, urgency evident in his voice. Finishing such a long series of commands in one breath and still be able to speak so clearly at a time like this. Amidst the commotion of the falling rocks and explosions, his voice appeared to be weak despite his deeply cultivated Xian abilities. But his voice was still heard by many. At least those who had gathered around him heard it. Mo Xiao Yao had just finished his sentence when he joined forces with Jia Qingyun, Xiao Tianya, and Chu Wuqing. The four fired away at the ground beneath their feet at full power at the same time. The might of four venerables using full power at the same time was stunning. Even the solid ground had no chance of resistance, and a huge and deep pit instantly appeared with a boom. The joint attack the four venerables had planned beforehand had become reality. But the target was neither the Tian Fa Xian beasts nor the Jun family, but the ground below. Immediately, 50 people rushed over, firing away at the ground with all their lives. With the combined forces of all these highly skilled experts, the pit was instantly deepened. Mo Xiao Yao roared and his beard spread about. The four venerables fired another combined attack, and the pit deepened again. In the time they had accomplished these 3 strikes, the mountain was already right above their heads. Shrill and devastating screams could be heard from the experts who did not join the group. Regardless of those who were stumped by fear or those who thought their skills were enough to help them survive, they were all pelted by the raining rocks and boulders. And to let out a desperate cry as such, it could be imagined that they would be crushed to death in the next moment. There's no time left. Everyone hurry in here. Faster. Mo Xiao Yao hollered. A huge rock hit on his skull. But it was broken into smithereens. What a hard skull. He flew into the base of the pit, spat out a mouthful of blood, before sending 10 consecutive strikes into the ground again. Countless weapons began to glow at the same time and flew out of the hands wielding them and into the incoming mountain body. Those were the beloved weapons that had followed these experts for hundreds of years, their closest partner and comrades. Every single one was a rare treasure. But at this moment, no one was stingy. There was no hesitation. In a life and death situation, no one still harped on these external items. In a flash, all these experts, whose faces were green and were clearly fatigued, jumped into the deep pit. But as fatigued as they were, they still mustered whatever tiny amount of energy they had and fired it into the ground. This pit they created was their only hope for survival. The deeper the pit, the bigger the chance of surviving. Otherwise, when the mountain crashed, the tremors from the impact would be enough to shake someone to death. The impact could even cause the ground beneath to converge and squeeze everyone to death. Regardless how powerful an expert was, in the face of nature's might, everyone was just like ants. At this moment, everyone could only think of hiding from being crushed by the mountain. No one had the mind to consider how to get out from the ground if they managed to avoid instant death. There's no time to think. Let's talk about it after we survive this. Just when the last person entered the pit, that humongous mountain finally crashed solidly into the ground. Hong! Finally, a deafening sound resounded all around. At this moment, the ground did not experience any tremors, but jumped up. Yes, it jumped up. The mountain rocks flew high up into the skies from the impact and landed somewhere unbeknownst like meteorites. Even the faraway Blizzard Silver City, that gigantic piece of architecture, jumped heavily into the air due to this huge change. There was no other words to describe it. The entire city jumped like a human. Even the most solid base left the ground in that instant. And by at least 3 foot. This bizarre sudden increase in altitude could only be described as jumping heavily. And it was in the manner of a standing high jump, literally pulling itself out of the ground. But a difficult performance like this, done by an entire city, this no one had ever seen before. Then Blizzard's Silver City landed back onto the ground with a bang, like a man who couldn't hold his liquor suddenly downing an entire jug of it, stumbling left and right before crashing face first into the ground. Every single structure in Blizzard's Silver City came crumbling down neatly in that instant. Waves of hysterical and panicked cries rang out, and moans and groans of agony were everywhere. Following it was a view that would be difficult to come by even in a million's years. The 7 mountain peaks surrounding Blizzard's Silver City began to send out tremors at the same time. Then, all the accumulated snow on the peaks of all these mountains flew upward at the same time, exposing the peaks of the mountain. The yellowish-brown mountain peaks that had never been revealed in even 10,000s of years. These layers of snow and ice paused mid-air like sharp cone hats, hollow in the center and like pointy mushrooms. Like 7 baldies had removed their hats at the same time, exposing the treeless mountain peaks. A spectacular sight as such left Jun Moxie, who was hovering mid-air to avoid the calamity, in complete awe and amazement. It's really fecking spectacular. My eyes are in for a treat today. If I had brought a camera along to snap a picture of this and sold it back on Earth, even my grandsons could retire with the money earned. What a pity. He had yet to finish marveling when yet another indescribable spectacle unfolded. Though all 7 hats had flown off in sync, they all fell at different timings due to their different sizes. There was not much difference in the state they began to crumble into, for they had all set off a series of avalanches of the same scale. And they were all great avalanches. An avalanche of such a scale was unprecedented. Jun Moxie definitely dared to bet that even if the Himalayan mountains were to experience an avalanche, it definitely would not compare to this. Snow flew up and covered everything overhead. A sight like this, not even 70. Even 70,000 atomic bombs exploded simultaneously could not be capable of creating a horrifying effect as such. Boom! 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 All the other mountains, regardless of their distance away, responded to this series of avalanche fulmination. All these mountains were shaking crazily as if they were dancing disco in a club after getting drunk on alcohol and high on ecstasy. If those layers of accumulated snow were clothes, then all those numerous mountain peaks were doing a striptease in sync, fighting to trigger their own avalanches and landslides. All these mountains and valleys were engaging in a crazy competition. Let's see who can trigger the greatest avalanche. Let's see whose avalanche is the most powerful. Let's see whose avalanche can splash the highest. Let's see whose avalanche is the prettiest. Let's see whose avalanche covers the greatest area. The east wind blew. The war drums pounded. Every mountain was a million-year heap who was not afraid to compete. This avalanche competition continued for an hour before finally coming to a stop unwillingly. The ground continued to shake. But finally, after a long time, everything became still and silent. The entire mountainous region had gone through a complete change. The terrains where thousands of mountains stood before had transformed into a vast and endless flatland. All the peaks had shortened by at least half their original height. Standing in stark contrast, only small bumps protruded amidst the snowy flatlands like a mushroom's head, but not a single bit of snow covered its bare head. This amount of snow was the result of snow accumulation for thousands of years, to all fall off within the same short span of time. It was still a massive amount. No wonder all the surrounding treacherous cliffs and endless valleys were filled up to the brim, creating a vast flatland. The snowy mountains right now seemed more flat than the flat plains. Cool. This is truly enjoyable. Jun Moxie, who was watching from the safest place midair, was extremely pleased and entertained by the entire spectacle. He couldn't help but compose a poem on the spot, reciting it aloud as he moved his head around revelment. The North Country scenery. Thousands li of enclaved ice. Whirling snow across the vast sky. Looking along the areas of Silver City. Only vast and endless white is seen. Top to bottom of the snowy mountains. An entire torrential surge. Mountains dance and expose their bare heads. Toss their large hats. Vie with the heavens for their handsomeness. Viewing on a sunny day. Watching fresh blood spill. Exceptionally enchanting. The snowy mountains are enriched in this scenic beauty, breaking the backs of the three holy lands. Pity. The venerable of life and death has already met death. The wandering venerable can no longer wander. Oh, all of them have become the past. When it comes to brilliant heroes, I'm still the best. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 724. The Arrival of the Great Army. Good poetry. Truly. Great poetry. Jun Moxie shook his head in marvel at his own creation, extremely satisfied with his unprecedented talent in literature. This terrorist, who single-handedly orchestrated the collapse of the Sword Peak, triggering a landslide and avalanche that was unprecedented in the world and had also led to the utter destruction of the mountainous scenery, and caused the fearsome blizzard Silver City to turn into countless pieces in the snap of a finger, was even feeling pleased with himself. What sort of person was this? Wasn't this too much? Far away, the snowy grounds were moving. A head popped out of the ground with a whoosh / then another popped out, followed by over 100 heads, and everyone pale in the face. Blood dripped from their mouths in a pathetic state. These were people from the Xiao family. They were forced to ambush the Xian beasts and the Jun family by the experts of the three holy lands. As they were still relatively near, they were caught up in the disaster. Although they weren't crushed to death head first, they were more dumb, and in the face of such tremendous and intense shaking, many of their people failed to survive. This group of people had almost 300 people upon arrival. About 70 to 80 died from the flying boulders. Those who survived all sustained injuries, and the aftershock killed another 50 people. They were at less than half of their total manpower, since there were countless casualties. Furthermore, there were many that were still buried under the avalanche, struggling for their lives, unable to get out due to the heavy injuries they had sustained. But those who had successfully escaped were also heavily injured. How did they have the extra strength to save them? So those who survived were just as good as dead. They won't be able to survive no matter what. The strongest man of the Xiao family, Xiao Xingyun, climbed up shakily, his face written with shock at the sight before him. But when he turned around to look at the direction of Blizzard's Silver City, he began to laugh maniacally, shouting loudly, "Ha ha ha ha! That's great! What the Xiao family cannot get, does that mean the Han family can own it forever? Ha ha ha! It's finally all destroyed. Good destruction. Just parting our ways like this. Perfect. Feck you, Blizzard Silver City. Ha ha ha. This feels great. Wonderful." He jumped around as he hollered and shouted, looking just like a lunatic. The other people who had dug their way out were bleeding from their ears, their eardrums having been damaged from the tremors. They couldn't hear a single word he was shouting clearly, so they watched him jump around and open his mouth like a madman, as if he were performing a mime. Actually, even Xiao Xingyun could not hear what he was shouting, but he was just hollering away like he had lost his soul or was possessed. This was an old man who had spent his whole lifetime cunningly plotting to usurp a position. A ruthless and formidable man of his generation. If he was not unfortunate enough to meet Jun Moxie, there would have been a high chance of him succeeding. But he was truly too unlucky to meet a malefic that was destined in his life. First having his descendants made into cripples, then manipulated to kill his own younger brothers. Even when his dreams were about to be achieved, everything was destroyed by this sudden turn of events. Blows after blows landed upon him, physically and mentally. It was already too much for him to bear. Such consecutive hits had already made him break down. Now looking at his lifelong goal, everything he had worked so much for, his much-desired Blizzard Silver City turning into a pile of rubble in a single day, he finally lost his marbles. No one else had intervened. And all his painstaking efforts, all those he held dear, all his ideals and goals, all his careful plotting and calculations, destroyed in the hands of a single person, Jun Moxie. It was all over for Xiao Xingyun. The current Xiao Xingyun was no longer that cunning, manipulative, and scheming person anymore. His entire spirit was broken. He was completely gone. Watching Xiao Xingyun, who was laughing and hopping up and down without the air of a Xian skill expert. The experts from the 3 Holy Lands that were in charge of keeping watch on the Xiao family glanced at each other wordlessly and shook their heads at each other. Looking at all these people who were behaving like ducks struck silly by lightning, they sighed in sync. If the enemy were to arrive right now, with their current condition, how could they battle? Even if they were able to engage in combat, how many of them will be able to exert enough fighting power? The leader of the group of experts from the 3 Holy Lands signaled to the rest to quickly use the current time to regain their senses. Even if they couldn't recover back to a pristine condition, they had to regain their sense of hearing. The feeling of being unable to hear was truly too uncomfortable. After some time, those with deeper spirit Xian cultivation managed to recover slightly. While the buzzing sound remained in their eardrums, they could at least hear each other's voices now. Leave these 2 men here. The rest hurry over to take a look. Not sure how the venerables are. Hopefully they are. 8 people flew over like shooting stars, taking a look at the surrounding. They all inhaled a sharp breath of cold air. On the ground, a range of mountains fallen over had appeared out of nowhere, hundreds of yards tall and covered with enormous boulders. Those boulders that had yet to come to a stop wobbled unsteadily, releasing rumbling noises. Beside it, there were a few large cracks that were so dark you could not see the bottom of it, clearly the result of the intense tremors. Not a single soul was seen around it. All the other experts from the 3 Holy Lands had disappeared. All 8 people stood before the mountain like stunned mullets. Looking at this gigantic mountain body, everyone's backs went cold. The current situation was not optimistic at all. Without a doubt, Mo Xiao Yao and the rest were buried under this. But with an analysis of the situation before their eyes, all 8 people did not have much hope of the possibility of Mo Xiao Yao and his party being alive. One of the people who coincidentally happened to be there almost died in the landslide when he was after Chu Chi Hun. That landslide was only 1/100th of this in terms of scale, but he was already crushed to that state. Although Mo Xiao Yao and the rest were much more powerful than himself, they were definitely not 100 times stronger than him. It was almost impossible to survive this ordeal. This was not something that could be resisted with mere human strength. No matter how powerful a person was, before the forces of nature, everyone was only a fart. How this happened didn't need much consideration. It was just not hopeful at all. These 8 people stood stupefied, sweating buckets. It was too hard to believe that such a powerful force, a combination of 500 great masters and 4 venerables, all perished within the blink of an eye. It was too difficult to believe. Suddenly, vibrating noises could be heard coming from underground. almost as if someone was hammering away at the ground. "They're not dead yet." All 8 people exclaimed in happiness at the miraculous change in situation. They all pressed their ears into the ground, listening carefully to where the sound was coming from so they could render help from outside. Everyone was aware that even if Mo Xiao Yao and his party were lucky enough to survive, the air below was thin, so it would not take long for them to suffocate. This sort of rescue mission HDS to be done as quickly as possible. Lives were being lost within the blink of an eye. After listening carefully, all 8 of them were speechless. The knocking sounds clearly came from the area near the center of the mountain. In order to save them, they'd have to shift all those huge boulders. Looking at this mountain laying horizontally, everyone felt a shiver down their spines. Even the smaller rocks definitely weighed thousands of jin, the bigger ones. Even a weighing scale for measuring millions of kilograms would be broken. One of the more sharp-witted people suggested an idea. "From the crevice. We can dig our way in from the side." The other 7 brightened up at the idea. Though it may be further away, it would be much faster. With no further delays, all 8 people set to work immediately. Finding a suitable location on the side of the crevice, they created a hole large enough for a person to stand in and began digging the tunnel. Without any discussion, they split up to work. 4 people dug into the rocks while the other 4 transported the pieces of rock out of the tunnel. This 8 were great master experts, working at full efficiency, coupled with the soil being softer nearer to the crevice. This progress was very much acceptable. With both sides working hard, the knocking sound on the other side was clearly getting more distinct, but also weaker. Clearly the other party was burning out already. The 8 people continued to work relentlessly, combing their efforts to create enough noise to let the other party know that they were thinking of a solution. All of a sudden, the sky darkened. It turned completely black without a single ray of light. It was just morning, and dawn had just broken. The sun had yet to come out. How could it be dark again? While the 8 were wondering, they suddenly heard a despairing cry from the side that was left behind. One of the people who was in charge of moving ran out quickly to take a look. He shouted before running back in, pale as a sheet. Trembling uncontrollably, he stammered, "S-sky, the S-sky. Dida. D-dead." "What? The sky is dead?" The other 3 movers headed out of the tunnel to take a look. They all fell on their B*TTS and began crying. "D-dead. We're dead." From the faraway horizon, a whole sedge of large cranes in the hundreds flew in neat rows from where the sun was rising. But why would these experts be afraid of mere cranes? The problem lied in that those mystical cranes were clearly peak level 9 Xian beasts. Every single one of them looked full of vitality. Their wings spread out large and imposing, their beaks sharp like swords. Their thick talons posed a deadly grip, and a cold gleam appeared from their sharp claws. Their huge red eyes, fierce and menacing, with bloodthirst gleaming from them. These 8 experts had never seen so many peak level 9 Xian beasts in action. A lineup like this. The few of them would be ripped into shreds within seconds. But that was not all. What was truly scary had yet to come. On the backs of those peak level 9 Xian cranes were huge, bulky and muscular men, with a menacing sharp glow in amidst that untamable wildness in their eyes, wearing the expression of predators looking for prey. The 8 people knew instantly that these weren't normal people. They were clearly Xian beasts who have managed to take human form. Crap. Feck. Why are there so many? Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 725. Despair. Regret. There was a batch coming from every direction. North, south, east, west. Covering the entire place. Xian Beast Army. The strength of the Jun family. A heavy and oppressing aura descended. A final troop came down from the top above their heads, blocking up the last ray of light and also the possibility escape. Oh my God! The 8 who were digging the tunnel were stupefied watching the majestic view in the sky before them. They suddenly felt a shiver that went straight from the top of their heads into their shoals. Badump. Badump. They all fell to the ground on their TTS. And at this moment, they all had the same urge, to remove the Xian skill protection and hit their heads against the walls. Fight? What fight? With a lineup like this, versus the number of us, we wouldn't even make the cut as an appetizer. The enemy's military was disciplined and everyone was full of vitality and spirit. They had already surrounded the entire area. On our side, our only fighting power is still buried underground. Even if they manage to make it out, they'll all be exhausted and injured. And to have to face this fearsome troops, there was simply no hope to anticipate towards. Like a widowed woman who had her menopause and losing her only son, there was absolutely no hope. Just as these 8 great masters were despairing, they heard a loud boom from the ground. With their efforts, there was lesser resistance from the ground. While these 8 people had lost all confidence and stopped trying, those who were trapped inside mustered their last bit of strength with their desire to live managed to hollow their way out. Mo Xiao Yao and the rest finally got to see the light again, but the 8 who were outside had no joy on their faces. Had these people burst their way out a moment earlier, they would have brought a glimpse of hope. But at this moment, despair not only completely came back, but was even darker than before. Irregardless of how high your status was, how powerful you were, how glorious your battles records were, right now, everyone was just a person stuck in a rut, a complete loser, a weakling. Facing a situation as dire as this, with so many heavy injuries sustained, was there a difference in coming out or not? Perhaps by dying inside, one might still die with a shred of dignity. But once they came out, they subjected themselves to another round of insult and ridicule. They would die either way, without a doubt. The wandering venerable Mo Xiao Yao was covered in bloodstains, and blood was still dripping from his mouth. Bruises littered his face, and even the hair on his head was clumped together by blood. His clothes were torn and tattered, and it was too horrible to look at. There was no remains of his aura in the past, but compared to the rest, he was one of those who had suffered the least injuries. The remaining hundreds of people were completely covered in injures, their faces deadly pale, panting heavily. Some of them even had to drag their broken and crippled limbs out. These people were originally still considerably lucky, managing to narrowly escape death by creating a hole in the ground. But perhaps they had used all their luck in this horrifically tough encounter. After they had all entered, did they realize it was a layer of 1,000-year-old Xian ice. Even a complete giant boulder would not make these experts feel despair like this. The hardness of a Xian ice layer was extremely tough, much more so than that of a giant rock. This caused them to remain stuck for way too long, almost suffocating to death instead. Coupled with the previous series of impact from the tremors and the pressure of the convergence. These 100 over-top experts had used up most of their Xian Qi. It was extremely unjust. Of the 300 that had managed to hide inside, only less than 100 managed to make their way out. The others had lost their lives in the ground below, and even those who made it out sustained heavy injuries and were exhausted. Mo Xiao Yao, Jia Qingyun, and Xiao Tianya had just emerged at the opening of the tunnel, inhaling the fresh air and sobering up. But in the next moment, they were all frozen in horror. The current them, as four-level venerables, barely had a fifth of their fighting capabilities. But the enemy was fully recharged and prepared, already having surrounded them. There was no hesitation in this battle. There was completely no need to fight. Forcefully them to try to fight was just asking to be ridiculed. Under the command of Jun Wuyi, Mei Shuiyan and the rest had made their way over to arrive at the timing Jun Moxie had specified. But halfway there, the sword peak suddenly collapsed, causing 80% of the flying Xian beasts to be freaked out and fall out from the sky and almost get buried alive by the avalanche. But luckily they were too far away, so they only encountered a small-scale avalanche with no bigger threats. And with everyone's solid capabilities, naturally they were able to get by with no loss. Even so, everyone was so frightened that all color left their face. Mei Shuiyan and Chu Qihun's minds were clear. The sword peak has really collapsed. The oath of the Dongfang family is broken. The oath that was impossible to be broken had been broken. It was believed that no one else in this world had this capability other than Jun Moxie, an existence that defied the heavens. To think, or even know, was one matter, but to see it with their own eyes was another. Everyone saw that huge mountain laying on its side. Despite all the mental preparation they had, they couldn't help but shiver. How small and ant-like they were before this huge mountain. And Jun Moxie was able to make this enormous mountain collapse just like that. Unbelievable. Even if they witnessed all of young Master Jun's previous antics, it was still hard to digest this miraculous feat today. This level of change, how could it be done by a mere human? After the tremors, Jun Wuyi immediately changed his commands, arranging the Xian beasts and experts into 7 teams, creating a cage to enclose the area from all directions. The sudden change in plans by Jun Wuyi was a perfect complement to the letter of challenge by Jun Moxie. No one would be able to escape this net of strict outflank of Xian beasts. After everyone had landed, the troops split into 2. The Jun family's troops surrounded the area while Solitary Falcon, Feng Wan Yun, Jun Wuyi, Sikongan Yi, Duanmu Chao Fan, and the Dongfang family were sent to put pressure on the remnants of the Xiao family. The Tian Fa troops led by Mei Shuiyan trapped the freshly emerged Mo Xiao Yao and his party completely. Facing the valiant forces of the Jun family, everyone in the Xiao family just sat on the ground trembling, their legs having turned jelly with fear. They had lost their last bit of courage to put up any resistance. Jun Moxie observed from above for a while, ensuring that there was no room for anyone to escape, before coming down. He had been keeping a tight watch from above the whole time. If anyone tried to escape, they would be the first person he killed personally. The Xiao family surrendered instantly, lacking the willpower to fight. The end was already decided, so Jun Moxie chose to land on the side where Tian Fa was. While Mo Xiao Yao and his party had sustained injuries and their fighting abilities were greatly reduced, they were still solid experts. A cornered beast would make a last, frenzied attempt at biting back. It was not plausible that no damage would be caused. And Jun Moxie had carefully plotted this entire setup to ensure that there would be no casualties. If something happened, Jun Moxie would not be pleased. Venerable Mei, truly, great methods. Mo Xiao Yao coughed out some soil and blood, deadly pale. He laughed sinisterly. Such a devious plot, cough. Cough, to think you'd be executed. I'm impressed. I'm not worthy. Compared to the various profound methods the three holy lands use, this is nothing. Venerable Mo has flattered me. Mei Shuayan spoke simply. Donned entirely in white. It was a fresh contrast to the pathetic state Mo Xiao Yao is in. Heaven and earth. Truly setting up the distinction between top and bottom. Sending a letter of challenge openly. Setting up the agreement. But employing such despicable methods in the dark. Plotting against us. Going back on your words. Winning not by battling. It's impossible not to win. Mo Xiao Yao took a quick glance at the number of men he had left. Indignation and rage causing him to tremble all over. Venerable Mei, can you even be considered the king of the Xian beasts of Tianfa? An overlord? Do you think such underhand methods complement your status as the lord of Tianfa? So what if I'm the lord of Tianfa? I was just a target whose life the three holy lands were after. Mo Xiao Yao. With the sudden turn of events today, how is it all my fault? Is there a purpose to using blame as your reason? Mei Shuayan replied coldly, disdain clear in her eyes. Mo Xiao Yao was so infuriated in this moment that he felt like killing himself. Almost 600 experts from three holy lands had followed him out. But due to the sudden collapse of the Sword Peak, almost 500 people were crushed to death like that. The remaining people were less than 100. A blow as heavy as this really gave Mo Xiao Yao an immense urge to kill himself. These were the elite forces from the war for seizing the heavens. The three holy lands had lost a third of their forces suddenly. How would they fight in the incoming war for seizing the heavens? Mo Xiao Yao was not being an hypocrite right now. He was truly worried for the safety of the continent from the bottom of his heart. When the three holy lands were in their prime, there were never any mishaps in the war for seizing the heavens. They even felt that they were too powerful, too mighty, and thought too highly of the grotesque outsiders. That was why they had the enticing idea of targeting Tianfa. Settling the opponent in advance. Eradicate Tianfa first. Even holding the Beast Kings as prisoners and using them as a ride. Using the Xian core to raise their own powers. Then focus all their energy on the war for seizing the heavens to snatch the glory of protecting the safety of mankind. At the same time, redressing the humiliating saying that had gone on for thousands of years, in the war for seizing the heavens. Tianfa is the first battle. But right now, Mo Xiao Yao really regretted it. Why didn't he wait until the war for seizing the heavens was over? All Mo Xiao Yao could think of right now was not whether they would make it out alive, but if they died here, could the war for seizing the heavens still be won? Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 726. Bear humiliation and blame. If they couldn't win, then the strange races would invade, and the mainland would fall into calamity. The common people will be met with poison, and chaos will reign all over the lands. Wouldn't the three holy lands be the greatest sinners of the world? Furthermore, this matter regarding Tianfa was also initiated by them. Nothing anyone said would make it the fault of Tianfa. Even if the strange races really succeeded in their invasion, the living environment of the Tianfa Xian beasts would not change at all. No outside forces had ever managed to invade Tianfa forest. That was the case in the past, the present, and will also be the same in the future as well. The current situation was one where if they wanted to advance, it would be impossible. If they wanted to fight, they wouldn't be able to beat their enemies. If they wanted to flee, it would be even harder. It could be said that they reached an unchangeable conclusion. The other party had arrived with formidable might and absolutely did not have any intentions of letting them off. From the looks of it, Their fates were already sealed. Mo Xiao Yao turned around and looked at the looks of despair and resignation on the others' faces. Then, he gritted his teeth, straightened his body, and walked slowly toward Mei Shuiyan. His steps were heavy and resolute, and his face was cold and firm. A fierce fire burnt within his eyes. "Brother Mo, what are you doing?" Jia Qingyun jumped in front of him. This savage venerable was also in an extremely wretched state. His face was sapped and pale, and he looked like an evil spirit. Even in the most difficult and downtrodden periods of their lives, these venerables had probably never been reduced to such a state before. "Get out of my way. This old is going to beg for mercy." Mo Xiao Yao's jet black hair flew lightly in the wind, although his face was tinged with deep shame. There was actually also a profound brilliance. "What? Beg for mercy?" Jia Qingyun exclaimed with shock, and his eyes grew wide. "Brother Mo, a man can forsake his pride, but he must have a spine. We're all brave warriors. If we have to die, so be it. How can we kneel and beg, for the sake of extending a pitiable existence by a few more days? Are our few hundred years of reputation so cheap as to not be cherished? Even if we must die a valiant death, it's better than living out a shameful life." "Nonsense. Is this old man a person who's afraid of death? But if you and I perished, what will happen to the war for seizing the heavens? If the mainland loses the war because of us, who will take responsibility for it? We still have 84 experts right now. If we are able to make it back, we will still be able to contribute 4 venerable experts and 80 superior supreme experts for the war for seizing the heavens. But if all of us died here, what use would we be?" Mo Xiao Yao roared with rage. His eyes were actually already gleaming with tears. For an arrogant 4th-level venerable expert who'd walked unrivaled through the world for so many years, to make such a decision was surely hundreds and thousands of times more difficult than dying. However, Mo Xiao Yao did not have any other options. He could accept death, and was even more so unafraid of death. However, he couldn't tolerate himself turning into the greatest sinner of the Xian continent. He was completely capable of being shameless and despicable under normal circumstances. In fact, he would have no scruple about doing the most reprehensible things while strutting around like a gentleman. But the crime of becoming a historical sinner like this was something he wouldn't be able to bear, not even if he died 10,000 deaths. He could accept dying in battle. He could accept being killed. He could harm others or be schemed against by others. But at this point, he could not afford to die. At least, he couldn't die such a worthless death. Because the war for seizing the heavens was the main goal that he had been working toward the day he entered the elusive world of immortals. Thus in that moment, no matter what, he had to bear the humiliation and live on. All for the greater good that he had been working toward his entire life. Seeing Mo Xiao Yao struggling as he walked step by step over, his legs seemingly weighing 1,000 jin, Jia Qingyun fell silent. He felt his eyes grow wet as well, and he nearly dropped tears. Without another word, he followed quietly behind Mo Xiao Yao, stepping forward resolutely. Xiao Tianye stood silently and sighed deeply. Finally, he also walked over together with Chu Wuqing. Mei Shuiyan saw the 4 walking toward her, but she did not feel any battle intent from them. Her heart turned complicated. But on the other side, Jun Moxie's head was filled with confusion. The first thing he thought of was, could it be, they've come to surrender and beg for mercy? But when he thought about it again, he felt that that was impossible. There wasn't supposed to be the word surrender in this world. Besides, what characters were these 4? They were proper venerable realm experts. Even the weakest among them was a second-level venerable. Most likely, even an ordinary spirit Xian expert would find it too humiliating to beg for their lives. Much less them. The pugilistic world had always viewed reputation as more important than life itself. How could a lofty expert like Mo Xiao Yao come and beg for mercy? Venerable Mei, this Mo has been defeated completely. We admit that we've lost this battle. Mo Xiao Yao's face was filled with deep shame and anger. His eyes carried an intense unwillingness and grief. But he still looked at Mei Shuayan directly in the eye, confronting his humiliation as he uttered each word. For Venerable Mo to admit defeat with his own mouth is quite a shock for me. I presume that the Venerable still has other words to say. Please don't hesitate to say them. Although Mei Shuayan's gaze was ice-cold as usual, her tone was courteous. Mo Xiao Yao hesitated for a moment. His mouth twitched hard. His face was bleak. And his lips squirmed a few times. But he did not make any sound and simply remained standing there. At the end of his heroic path, this expert of a generation still needed to humble himself to bow and beg. This feeling caused him to feel a sudden intense sourness in his heart, rendering him incapable of speech. Mei Shuayan and Jun Moxie looked at him and suddenly saw a shocking scene. Mo Xiao Yao's hair, which had always been jet black for over 300 years, had with a speed visible to the naked eye, turned gray in a short moment. The entire thing had transpired in the time it took one to take a few breaths. And Mo Xiao Yao's hair had already changed so greatly. One could see that the pain and torment in his heart at this moment and how unspeakably difficult it was to bear. Begging for mercy, even if a common street thug lost a fight, they would very rarely be seen begging for mercy. As enemies, we're at a state where either you die or I perish. The winners live, and the losers die. Since the ancient times, this is natural order of things. Killing an enemy that is dangerous to oneself is a perfectly justified matter. Mo Xiao Yao swallowed the blood in his mouth with great difficulty. His body looked as frail as a candle in the wind, but he still looked resolutely at Mei Shuayan. We've been defeated and do not have any more strength for retaliation. Our life and death is already within the palms of you. Venerable Mei. There's no wrong even if we die. Mo Xiao Yao closed his eyes and gritted his teeth, and a hoarse voice came out of his mouth. But this old man has come forward now to only ask Venerable Mei one thing. Could you allow this old man and the rest a path of survival? After speaking those words, he remained standing with his eyes closed, not moving. It seemed as if he'd turned into a statue in that instant. Two streams of old tears flowed out of his tightly shut eyes, rolling down his cheeks. In that very instant, deep wrinkles and spots appeared all over his face. In that moment, Jun Moxie and Mei Shuayan nearly did not dare to believe their own ears. Begging for mercy. A fourth-level venerable was actually begging for mercy so loudly before everyone. This was simply harder to believe than if the sky collapsed. After a long time, Mei Shuayan finally shook her head lightly and looked at Mo Xiao Yao as she asked in a solemn tone. Venerable's words have truly exceeded my expectations. Is this because of the war for seizing the heavens? It doesn't matter what the reason is. Today, this old man is simply here to beg for his life. This old man only asks for 2.5 years more of life. That would be enough. Mo Xiao Yao's eyes remained tightly shut, and his lips trembled. His face was as pale as a piece of paper, but he still uttered each word clearly. After the war for seizing the heavens, if this old man and the rest have still not perished and leave with our life on the pillar of heaven's mountain, We will come to the Tian Fa forest on our own and die in front of Venerable Mei. We'll return our lives back to Venerable Mei. Mei Shuiyan's expression instantly jumped. In that moment, she truly didn't know what kind of reaction she should have. Even with her wealth of experience, this situation was still completely out of her expectations. She was already mentally prepared for any situation from the beginning. Whether it be a fierce battle to the death, an easy victory where her forces overran the broken enemy, or even a situation where the opponents self-detonate to perish together, she had already prepared a response for every situation. But the only thing she hadn't thought of was that Venerable Mo Xiao Yao would actually beg for his life. Surely this world was too crazy. One must know that the three Holy Lands had always known that Venerable Mei was only a peak second-level venerable. Even Mo Xiao Yao only came to know that Mei Shuiyan had somehow broken through to the third-level venerable after he came here. Even until now, he still didn't know that she'd broken through again. But Mo Xiao Yao was a legitimate fourth-level venerable expert. If one wanted to make a comparison, it would be similar to if a supreme was begging a Sky Xian cultivator for mercy. What kind of ludicrous matter was this? A moment ago, they were still tearing at each other's throats. But in the blink of an eye, one was begging the other for mercy. What kind of mentality would one need for this? What kind of courage? What kind of endurance for humiliation was this? If not for the sake of the war for seizing the heavens, would Mo Xiao Yao and the other proud individuals do this kind of thing? But because of the war for seizing the heavens, they were willing to endure the shame, for the sake of the safety of the continent and all the common people under the sky. Mei Shuiyan understood this point extremely well. The war for seizing the heavens was also the sole purpose of all her efforts. Thus, she could understand Mo Xiao Yao's current emotions deeply. And for that reason, she felt exceedingly moved in that moment. In fact, she very nearly agreed in that instant. For the sake of the war for seizing the heavens, Mo Xiao Yao was actually able to make such a sacrifice, discarding the reputation that he had worked so hard to build for over 300 years. If so, what was so important that she couldn't give up on? She had always viewed the war for seizing the heavens as more important than any other matter and the purpose of all her hard work throughout her life. Even if Mo Xiao Yao went back on his words, she had no grounds to reject him now. Wait! Jun Xie opened his mouth, his eyes as cold as ice. Mo Xiao Yao, wandering venerable, do you believe that by using the name of the war for seizing the heavens, asking for mercy in the name of the world and bringing up the suffering of the world, that we would let you go? Furthermore, we would be moved to tears and escort you and your disgraced troops off. These words were like the sharpest needle, stabbing deeply into Mo Xiao Yao's heart. Mo Xiao Yao's entire body spasmed with pain and his facial muscles twitched animatedly. However, he still did not say anything. Did you think that by making such a large sacrifice, it would be right and natural that we leave you a path of life? But is it truly like that? Jun Xie continued coldly. Mo Xie. This matter concerns the war for seizing the heavens. All the secular arguments are but minor matters. Venerable Mo's request is for the sake of the war for seizing the heavens and the safety of the continent. His feelings, I can understand them, Mei Shuiyan hurriedly advised. But I cannot understand them. When men are speaking, a woman like you should shut her mouth. Go and stand to the side. Jun Xie remained unmoved as he scolded with a stern voice. Taking one step forward, he stood at the front of the entire troop. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 727. Is being kind a crime? The Tian Fa Xian beasts almost all fell to the ground with admiration in this moment. This brother-in-law of theirs was simply too formidable. Eldest sister was so domineering. Yet she was still scolded like that. This was too imposing. Too incredible. Mei Shuaiyan's face turned white, and a trace of rage finally blazed in her eyes. She was not angry about Xie snapping at her. Instead, she was angered by his uncaring attitude toward the fate of the common people. Xie, how could you say that? For the sake of the war for seizing the heavens, what are the losses of mere personal interests worth? Mei Shuaiyan took a deep breath and suppressed her anger. Even Venerable Mo could make such a great sacrifice. Do we have to still insist on taking their lives? Is there any meaning in doing that? Truly too soft-hearted. I told you to scram to one side just now. Didn't you hear? Jun Moxie snorted angrily. If not for your concern for the war for seizing the heavens, would those 10 superior supreme experts from the elusive world of immortals have been able to inflict you with a heavy injury that plagued you for more than 100 years? If not for your concern for the war for seizing the heavens, would the 3 holy lands have dared to take actions against you? Countless people would have already died by your hands in that case. If they didn't take advantage of your soft-heartedness and your concern for the big picture, would they ever dare to do so? Time and time again, you've placed yourself under that war for seizing the heavens. And time again, you've ended up suffering. Jun Moxie smiled coldly and continued. And this time, the reason they're begging for mercy is actually still for that dang war for seizing the heavens. Let me ask you, how much longer do you intend to suffer before you finally wake up? Think about it yourself. If the roles were swapped, and you were the one begging for mercy today, do you think those people from the 3 holy lands would let you off? Could it be that you weren't seeking to live because of the war for seizing the heavens? I can of course imagine what they would choose. But this is different. Mei Shuaiyan hurriedly denied. I can sense the venerable of life and death's true feelings this time. He's really. And so what? It still wouldn't make any difference. Jun Moxie said coldly. Because this time, they're still making use of your broad-mindedness. I've never denied that Mo Xiaoyao is truly thinking for the sake of the war for seizing the heavens this time and that his actions are truly for the sake of the world. As for his heart, you're not the only one can feel it. I can also sense his sincerity. But this should not be the reason for us to let them off just because they begged for mercy. Do you understand? This was the first time that Jun Moxie and Mei Shuaiyan had quarreled since they had met. And it was an extremely serious argument. Jun Moxie, don't try to measure the stature of an upright man by the yardstick of a base man. Although we're in a poor situation right now, we're still not people you can demean. Jia Qingyun gritted his teeth with anger, and the veins on his temples throbbed heavily. I've always been a base person. Have I ever denied that? Only, are you all considered upright men? Jun Moxie looked at him with a chilly gaze. I only ask you one thing. Mo Xiaoyao. Stop making that face as if you have suffered bitterly in the society and are nursing a great grievance as if you've been wronged greatly. Lift up your head and open your eyes. Since the most difficult words have already been said. Could it be that you don't have the guts to open your eyes and look at the person who holds the power of life and death over you in the eyes? Mo Xiaoyao opened his eyes slowly as though they were heavy with lethargy. A deep humiliation could be seen in his eyes as he asked coldly, "What do you want to ask?" Go ahead. This old man shall hear them clearly. I'll only ask you one very simple question. Did the elusive world of immortals take action against Venerable Mei so many times over the years by making use of her weakness of prioritizing the big picture over her interests? Did you all do that knowing that she wouldn't kill recklessly because she was considering the war for seizing the heavens? That's a very simple question, right? You just need to answer yes or no. Give me a definite answer. Jun Moxie asked coldly. Yes. A hint of guilt appeared on Mo Xiao Yao's pale face. However, his answer had come without hesitation. The fact was as such. They had indeed been taking advantage of her kindness to plot against her time and time again. If Venerable Mei was a vicious character that didn't shy away from doing any evils and was the kind of Tianfa lord who acted without any inhibitions, would you still dare act like that? Jun Moxie pressed relentlessly. We would not dare. But, if an opportunity appeared for us to kill her with certainty, we would definitely seize it. Mo Xiaoyao sighed and shook his head. Because, if she disregarded everything and one day decided to activate the Xian beasts to trample the continent, a huge disaster would ensue. Thus, we needed to consider very seriously whether she was such a character or not. It's fortunate for us that she isn't. Mei Shuayan closed her eyes bitterly. She had already guessed that this was reason long ago. But hearing these words from the culprit with her own ears now still gave her a deep pain. As if 10,000 arrows had pierced her heart. There was also a sadness over the worthlessness of her actions. It turned out that the reason that the people whom she'd fought side by side with in the past moved against her was actually because of her kindness. It was because she was too kind and too concerned about the big picture that they acted so outrageously, ambushing her on so many occasions and even almost taking her life. It was because they knew that her retaliation would never be too ruthless. She would never deal with them in the same way they dealt with her. Thus, they became completely fearless. What exactly happened to this world? Is kindness the reason for deserving death? Is kindness the reason for deserving to be ambushed and plotted against? Is kindness the reason to be suppressed? Is kindness the excuse for others to act despicably? In that moment, Mei Shuayan sunk deeply into a state of bewilderment. Now, you've been defeated. But you suddenly want to bring up the matter about the war for seizing the heavens. Jun Moxie laughed scornfully. Venerable Mo, I know that you are truly feeling regretful in your heart now, which is why you begged for mercy in consideration for the war for seizing the heavens. I know that you truly wish to contribute your strength toward the war for seizing the heavens. That is an undoubtedly noble and admirable intention. To this extent, you've also made a huge sacrifice. Based on just this point alone, I respect you. But I have to say this. No matter how noble your intentions are, they are not the reason for you to bully others and do all kinds of evil. Jun Moxie laughed coldly. For the sake of the war for seizing the heavens, for the sake of the world, these words are extremely good to hear. And you all have indeed fulfilled those words and made your contributions. But that doesn't mean anything. Every evil needs to have a corresponding consequence. Just because you've guarded the continent in the war for seizing the heavens doesn't mean that other people should obediently stretch out their necks for you to slaughter whenever you please. Even if it's for a so-called heroic cause, evil deeds cannot be simply covered up with past merits. Jun Moxie continued emotionlessly. There are some people who commit robbery so they can feed their family. In a more noble view, perhaps they've adopted countless orphans and was robbing others to feed the children. However, the noble cause does not change the fact that they've committed robbery. Some people commit murder in order to protect their loved ones. But the fact remains that they killed and took another's life. This is the truth. No one would let these criminals go just because they committed the evil for a so-called noble cause. By what rights then, Do you expect to be an exception? Jun Moxie pressed relentlessly. You schemed against your comrades, betrayed your allies, hunted the Xian beasts, and robbed their Xian cores, justifying everything by claiming that you're increasing your strength for the war for seizing the heavens. Of course, I indeed believe that you're truly using your upgraded strength for the war for seizing the heavens. However, are there really any connections between this and that? The war for seizing the heavens was your duty from the very start. It's not an excuse. And it's not a shameless reason for you to commit all kinds of evils. Jun Moxie snorted and his voice grew increasingly calm. Today, I will definitely not let you off. Pointing coldly at the group of experts on the ground, he sneered. Mo Xiaoyao, I believe that you meant every single word you just said. But do you know how many people have died here today? Turn around and look at your subordinates. Which one of them do not harbor extreme hatred toward us? There are over 80 superior supreme experts gathered here now. Mo Xiaoyao, while I may believe that you will not seek revenge. What about them? Can you guarantee that none of them will seek revenge against me and against the Jun family? Tell me, can I really let you all go? Can I release the tiger back into the mountain? Would I dare to do that? If it were you, would you dare? Mo Xiaoyao's spirits sank and he sighed longly. From the start, he had found Jun Moxie's words to be incredibly jarring to the ears and he took them as a great humiliation. However, as he listened, he finally understood. They had indeed been too overboard with their actions. The three Holy Lands had always felt that as long as it was for the war for seizing the heavens, every action they took would be right. However, this thinking in itself was a great mistake. Jun Moxie, what inhibitions do you still have about us? Could it be that you want us to swear blood oaths and sign a written vow with our blood? Xiao Tianya asked with clenched teeth. Blood oath? That's nothing but a line of words. Anyone can utter those words by moving their lips. Written vow? That's also just a piece of paper. Do you think I would put my faith in those things? Jun Moxie laughed coldly. You want me to bet the lives of my entire family on the reliability of your so-called oaths? You people can even turn your backs on the 1,000-year-old pledges made by your ancestors and attack TNFA. If I believed your words today, wouldn't I truly be a retard? I will not take this kind of risk and I do not dare take this kind of risk. We've suffered an overwhelming defeat in this battle. To think that we had been self-indulgently plotting and scheming, even making plans for after the battle. So it turns out that we were overestimating ourselves and courting our own humiliation. Mo Xiaoyao laughed bitterly. Turning around, he saw the rage and hatred on the faces of those 80 experts behind him. Even Mo Xiaoyao could clearly sense the deep hatred and malice in their hearts. And he couldn't help but sigh helplessly. It was as Jun Moxie had said. Although he could guarantee that he would not seek revenge himself, even going as far as being able to guarantee that Jia Qingyun, Xiao Tianya, and the other venerables would not seek revenge. But what about the rest? Judging by the poisonous rage on their faces and the killing intent radiating from their bodies, if those people said that they wouldn't seek revenge, even he wouldn't believe them. There was simply no need to talk about it. This kind of bone-deep hatred was so intense that even if they were bounded by all kinds of vows and restrictions, someone would definitely still secretly take revenge. As for the words about them going to TNFA to offer up their lives if they managed to survive the war 2.5 years later, that was even more nonsensical. Jun Moxie most likely would not fear their vengeance. And the same went for Mei Shuiyan. However, what about the rest of the Jun family? The other TNFA Xian beasts? Not everyone was venerable level experts. There was also the Duanmu family, Sikong family, Dongfang family. As long as any of the people here managed to leave here alive today, those families would all be met with a vengeance of blood. That was a matter of certainty. There was no doubt about it. Just 10 superior supremes were able to ambush Venerable Mei back then, even nearly managing to take her life. Not to mention the 80 peak level experts present here. Although Mei Shuayan had already been seriously injured at that time, the might of those superior supremes was also unquestionable. With the exception of the Jun family, it wouldn't be an impossible matter to completely flatten all those affiliated families. In fact, just sending 1 or 2 of the 80 experts here would be more than enough to accomplish this. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 728. I never take risks. The other 4 venerables also instantly recognized this point. Everyone here was an experienced veteran. If they still couldn't figure this out, they would be too naive. Thus, none of them could say a single word. In that moment, even they felt that the war for seizing the heavens, which was their reason and faith, was simply a joke, a completely lame joke. Jun Moxie had made one thing known very clearly: no matter how noble their motive was, it was not a reason to do evils freely. Regardless of whether the original intention was good or bad, it would not be able to cover the crimes they'd committed. Behind them, a superior supreme expert took a step forward, his nose fuming with anger. Jun Moxie, you're going too far in bullying others. For the sake of the people and the safety of the continent, our 3 holy lands have guarded the borders with perseverance and consistency for thousands of years. What crime is there to speak of? Have you considered that if all of us died now, who would go and block the invasion of the strange races in the war for seizing the heavens? Do you really intend to see the world burn and the people slaughtered by the strange races? The safety of the continent? The people? Jun Moxie cocked his head and looked at him. The feck does that have to do with me? I've never considered them as a factor even once. I only know one thing. Even if the entire continent was destroyed after I killed all of you, it will not affect me. I am a selfish person and have always been a selfish person. A sharp glint flashed across Jun Moxie's eyes as he continued slowly. I've always lived my life by a belief: if people do not transgress against me, I will not transgress against them. Give a plum in return for a peach. An eye for an eye. I don't care if your actions are motivated by the wish to save the entire world. As long as you offend me, you will die. It's either your death or mine, and I don't want to die yet. What I want is actually very simple. I only want to live in peace. I've never gone and offended you all in an way, but you kept coming to bully and suppress me. Left with no choice, I could only retaliate. But now that you all are at a disadvantage, you want to talk to me about the war for seizing the heavens? Ha 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 ha. Jun Moxie laughed aloud. One can be shameless, but they can't be shameless to this extent. Jun Moxie, you bastard. A person behind Mo Xiao Yao hollered with rage. There's no need to say any more. Mo Xiao Yao chuckled and raised his hand, silencing the people behind him. His back straightened abruptly. If you want to kill, just kill. Why say so much? Since things have already reached this point, further talk is useless. However, all of us here are experts in our own rights. Even if we must die, we will still face it head on. We will not die like cravens. I, Mo Xiao Yao, will not resign to die in the hands of others. Mo Xiao Yao smiled lightly and picked up a handful of snow from the ground, carefully rubbing it on his face. The wandering venerable shall still be a wanderer even in death. His mental state had already recovered to his usual, casual demeanor. This wandering venerable did a very thorough job of cleaning himself up. The blood and stains on his face were completely wiped away. All of his actions were extremely natural. Then, he sorted out his disorderly hair and beard. When he turned around and faced his subordinates again, he'd already reverted back to the graceful demeanor of the wandering venerable who lived freely, unfettered under the sky. The only thing was that when he turned his face away, Jia Qingyun and the rest could see the deep sense of shame and humiliation in his eyes. Shame. A fourth-level venerable under compelling circumstances and left with no choices had lowered himself to beg his enemies for mercy. However, he'd been rejected. That was a completely inconceivable matter. The way they saw it, with Mo Xiao Yao's identity, the fact that he could humble himself like that and plead with two juniors who were beneath him in strength, was already an unthinkable matter. It could be said that this was both a commendable and a humiliating action. If you give someone a peach, they will reciprocate with a precious jade. If the other party left one side of the net open, would Mo Xiao Yao not return the favor? No matter how one looked at it, the other party should be willing to give them this much face at least. Just for the sake of Mo Xiao Yao's concern for the bigger picture. They should feel touched by his heart for the people and the world, respectfully escorting them out. But to think that Jun Mo Xie would actually be so heartless as to directly reject them. It was a truly unthinkable outcome. Brother Mo, you must not take this matter to heart. How will today's matter bring any harm to your illustrious reputation? The matter today will even improve your reputation, leaving your name among the heroes of history. Only this kind of short-sighted, selfish, young generation brat would show disdain toward your noble efforts. This old man looks down on such idiots from the bottom of my heart. Jia Qingyun consoled and continued with a sigh. The pugilistic world now is no longer the same one we knew. The number of warm-blooded people in the world is getting fewer and fewer. His words were filled with sadness, as if he were lamenting the moral degeneration of the world and how human hearts were not what they were in the old days. Mo Xiao Yao shook his head, his expression one of exhaustion. Brother Jia, we're all experienced people, so what's the point in deceiving yourself and others? The bitter fruits of today are all a result of the seeds we sowed in the past. Only until today did this old man finally truly understand. Venerable Mei had been preparing wholeheartedly for the war for seizing the heavens all this time. But have we let her off even once? Every time she backed off one step, we'd take a larger step forward. Have we ever considered the bigger picture before? Now that things have reached this stage, do we still have the face to accuse others of not considering the big picture? Let me ask this. If the person in front of us was changed from Jun Mo Xie to you, taking into consideration the same inhibitions he's facing, would you have the ability to overlook close to 100 peak-level experts who already have a death grudge against you? Do you really have the guts to do that? Jia Qingyun's face turned slightly green, and his expression was a little awkward. This time, he stayed silent, unable to retort a single word. Everyone, you're on your own now. This old man has grown tired of the affairs of the mundane world and will be leaving first. Mo Xiao Yao looked calmly at everyone. His back was turned to Jun Mo Xie, and without turning his head, he spoke carefreely. After today, no matter if you're friend or foe, as long as there are any survivors, when you meet the lords of the three holy lands in the future, please help me to bring a word back. There was a hint of heartfelt lamentation on his face as he slowly said, "Don't use nobleness as an excuse. And don't find excuses for committing evils. I hope that in the future, the three holy lands will not shame the once radiant name of the war for seizing the heavens." That is the greatest glory of the three holy lands. He paused slightly and smiled bitterly. And remember, it is only a source of glory, not a qualification. After saying that, a warm smile appeared on Imo Xiao Yao's face as he sighed. Do not say that there's no path beyond the clear skies. Live carefreely while you can. This sentence was constructed from the names of the himself and his blood brother, Mo Wu Dao, the current lord of the elusive world of immortals 1. The two brothers were of bureaucratic descent. At the time of their birth, their father had recently been dismissed from office. A friend of their father had gifted him with a poem when he came to visit. When will there be an end to the chase for position and wealth? Fame and fortune can disappear in the blink of an eye. Do not say that there's no path beyond the clear skies. Live carefreely while you can. Their father had picked out the words Wu Dao, no path, and Xiao Yao, carefree from the poem and named the brothers in that manner. Mo Wu Dao. No matter what situation it was, never run out of paths to tread. Mo Xiao Yao. No matter what, never behave too carefreely and lose your bearings in conceitedness. This was a heartfelt wish from their father to his two sons, to act as a blessing, as well as a warning. At this moment, other than his father's wish, Mo Xiao Yao could only think about his elder brother, Mo Wu Dao, not the Mo Wu Dao that was the lord of the elusive world of immortals. After saying those words, Mo Xiao Yao sighed lightly. His body shook and suddenly became still. A stream of thick white smoke rose out of the crown of his head, hovering and not dissipating for a long time. The chilly wind of winter blew relentlessly around him, but the smoke did not scatter. A long time passed and the thick white smoke turned into a plume of mist, thinning as it spread into the air, finally disappearing completely. Mo Xiao Yao had destroyed his cultivation, cut off his own heart, and perished on the snow-capped peaks. A fourth-level venerable's life was ended just like that. Jia Qingyun stood ramrod straight like a tree, completely motionless. He felt as if he were stuck in a dream, and everything seemed extremely unrealistic. A fourth-level venerable was such a supreme existence. However, he was actually forced to such a point where he would commit suicide in front of everyone. A look of pity flashed through Jun Moxie's eyes. However, his face still remained stern and cold, cruel to the extreme. Jia Qingyun, I will give you all a chance too. You can choose to end your own life, keeping a complete corpse. You will have a moment to prepare yourself and face your death. Jun Moxie said coldly. Not a shred of emotion could be heard in his voice. Moxie, they cannot die. Mei Shuiyan's face turned anxious. This is a matter that concerns the war for seizing the heavens after all. It's a major matter that concerns the future of the world. You must consider seriously. Once the strength of the defense forces drop, the battle situation could turn. At that time, the war for seizing the heavens would really be. Shuiyan, why are you still so insistent? Could it be that you still cannot see the reality before you clearly? Didn't you notice the eyes of these people? I've already killed over 500 people. The people who died were comrades that they had known and lived with for at least 100 years. A friendship like that can be even dearer than one's own kin. I believe that compared to those strange races, these people are even more adamant about seeing us die. If they pass through this ordeal, they will strive their hardest to take their revenge against my family. There's no reason for me to keep these people alive. Jun Moxie snorted coldly. If I'm just by myself, I could naturally disregard their hatred. But I have a family and friends. Would they disregard those people? Your insistence is the same as risking the lives of my family and friends. In my heart, The safety of those close to me is more important than anything. I will not take the risk, no matter how tiny it is. Even if they're truly good people, I would still slaughter them without hesitation. Now that things have reached his stage, there's no longer any room to negotiate. Not to mention, these people are basically just a bunch of complete hypocrites. Jun Moxie continued coldly. Even if this is a huge sin, I will shoulder it alone. Shouldering the weight of sin is still better than shouldering the weight of guilt. You're simply too heartless. Mei Shuayan looked at him with grief. Why do you not have the slightest bit of mercy in your heart? Toward the people of the entire continent, do you really not feel even the slightest bit of responsibility? Even if it's just a little bit? Shuayan, you said that I'm heartless? That I do not feel any responsibility? But am I really the ruthless one? Let's say that because of a moment of leniency. I received in exchange the annihilation of my entire family, the slaughtering of my friends and loved ones. What would you do? Even if I'm worrying too much and I was wrong this one time, can I afford to be wrong? As for the war for seizing the heavens, even if all these people died today, it does not mean that the war for seizing the heavens will fail. Jun Moxie raised his head proudly. Even if Butcher Zhang is dead, this young Master Jun will still not eat an unskinned pig. In contrast, if the safety of the continent is placed into the hands of these hypocrites, even if we won, it would be a form of humiliation. They are not worthy. Not in the slightest. Jun Moxie snorted coldly. His words were resolute and decisive, without the slightest bit of hesitation. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 729. The Rule of the Evil Monarch. But they're truly wholeheartedly fighting for the sake of the war for seizing the heavens, even if they were despicable in the past and behaved shamelessly. Their cause is noble and honorable. Now that they've been forced into a corner, why can't you leave them a path out? Even if we kill them after the war for seizing the heavens after they've outlived their usefulness, it's still better than killing them right now. At the very least, they can still be used to contribute a point of effort towards the war for seizing the heavens. Mei Shuayan pressed with a loud voice. Aren't you also wholeheartedly fighting for the war for seizing the heavens? But you've never behaved despicably and shamelessly. Your cause was similarly noble and honorable. Yet, they still did not spare any methods and was relentless in dealing with you. When you were forced into a corner, did they leave you a path out? Jun Moxie looked at Mei Shuayan with exasperation as he sighed. In the hearts of these people, today's hatred can only be appeased with blood. A debt of blood can ultimately only be washed clean with fresh blood. If it were us in their place, it would be the same as well. Lass, you are still too naive. You're simply too pedantic. Mei Shuayan's figure slumped, and her tone finally softened as she said in a pleading voice. Moxie, just let them off this one time. For the war for seizing the heavens, for the people of the mainland. Moxie, I'm pleading with you. Be noble this one time. Believe in humanity this one time. No way. To talk about humanity with people without any humanity is the stupidest thing one can do. You've already been dragged down by the war for seizing the heavens for so long. Why are you still insisting so stubbornly? Could it be that a tragedy must really happen before your eyes before you will wake up? Jun Moxie shook his head slowly and decisively. His face remained as cold and expressionless as a statue. In the future, I will also participate in the war for seizing the heavens. Jun Moxie raised his head and looked at the clouds floating about the sky. However, I only wish to fight alongside my comrades and not my enemies. Because I dare not trust my back to these people. Back then at Tiannan, the war between humans and Xian beasts was filled with betrayal and treachery because of this very reason. I do not wish to have to experience it personally. The three holy lands are not necessarily indispensable for the war for seizing the heavens. Jun Moxie continued coldly. Even if all of them are dead, there's still me, Jun Moxie. Since I've killed them, I will naturally make up for the deficit. My purpose is not to just contend against the strange races in the war for seizing the heavens. I want to completely annihilate them, erasing the need for a war for seizing the heavens in the future. It's not for the sake of a so-called noble purpose. I just don't want the world to be plagued with so much hypocrisy. Jun Moxie said sharply. I detest pretentiousness. I'm especially disgusted with people who commit evil acts for their own benefits while pretending they're serving a noble cause. I don't just want to kill these people. When I have enough strength, I will personally go and wipe out those three holy lands. Jun Moxie smiled lightly. The chilly wind swirled around him, causing his hair to dance atop the mountain peak. He stood confidently with a detached attitude, his voice cold and emotionless. There's one thing that I'm sure you don't know. The greatest threat to this continent is not the external forces, but the internal conflicts. External enemies can never truly destroy a country or a world. However, internal battles can destroy everything very quickly. And today, the three holy lands have already become the very source of all major conflicts in the continent. Even if Tianfa is gone, and you and I are removed from the equation, the three holy lands would still eventually fight against each other. They would fight for the title of number one under the heavens and the ultimate glory of being at the peak of the world. Since it's like that, I might as well just claim that glory for myself. So, I must kill. My original intentions never involved the safety and peace of the world. I'm not such a noble person. However, if people think that they can bully me, that's impossible. Not the three holy lands. And not the strange races. The same goes for a venerable expert or even a saint. Even if the nine nether first young master came back to life, he can forget about dictating my destiny. Jun Moxie smiled stubbornly, putting emphasis on each word. My destiny is directed by me, not the heavens. If I fight, I will fight to the end. As long as I'm alive, I will be upright and indomitable. If I die, then there's naturally nothing to say. I'm not a good person, but I'm not a bad person either. I'm not a noble gentleman, but I'm not a base person. But at the very least, I will not be a hypocrite. I am the evil monarch. The monarch of 10,000 evils. Sovereign of kings. Above is my rule of the evil monarch. Mei Shuayan took a step back heavily. She was clear that at this point, there was already no more meaning in saying anything else. To think that her man was actually such a unique person. At this moment, she suddenly felt as if the person in front of her was not Jun Moxie. Instead, he was like that domineering and unrestrained nine nether first young master. This odd feeling caused her to feel some fear and even some unfamiliarity. The Jun Moxie who was standing opposite her seemed somewhat distant. Even if you feel wronged, even if you don't understand, can't you just condone it this time? Mei Shuayan could not grasp this point even until now. But she had overlooked one thing. Her seemingly merciful condoning could perhaps be repaid with relentless suppression. Her tolerance was the best excuse for her enemies to grow more bold. Her moment of mercy was more likely to end with irreparable despair and remorse. Between mortal enemies, there were never any morals or justice to speak of. Take herself for instance. If she had been more ruthless and directly killed the 10 experts who encircled her the first time, then even if the 3 holy lands were more unbridled, they wouldn't be aggressive to such an extent. Condonation was the best habitat for breeding evil. This point was something that Jun Moxie, who had experienced 2 lives, understood better than anyone else. Thus, he would not leave his enemies with any chance to retaliate. Nobody could affect his decision this time. Not even Mei Shuiyan, whom he loved dearly. Across from him, the experts of the 3 holy lands had already stood up, their hatred and anger surging to the skies. Roaring savagely, they charged forward with the momentum of one who wished to perish with their enemies. Vengeance for Venerable Mo. Vengeance for our fallen brothers. You want us to kill ourselves? How could there be such a free thing in the world? Brothers, let's fight it out with them. Fight with your lives. If we each kill 1, we'd have broken even. If we kill 2, we'll have profited. Jun Moxie did not move and watched them charging over coldly. His face was as calm as an ancient stone statue and his eyes blazed with a chilly gaze as he slowly raised a hand. All of a sudden, a loud roar rang from his mouth. Kill. Strike hard and fast. Do not leave a single one alive. Mei Shuiyan closed her eyes painfully and turned her face away. Accompanying Jun Moxie's bloody command, a mighty blizzard instantly blazed in the air as 500 peak 9th level Xian beasts and beast kings roused into action at the same time. Charging and diving, all the Xian beasts rushed forward with the momentum of a mighty thunder. They had already grown impatient long ago. Their blood had been boiling uncontrollably since long ago. What they needed was a battle. Only battling, continuously battling. A hot-blooded and enjoyable battle. To them, it didn't matter whether those people from the 3 holy lands were good or bad people. In fact, it was completely meaningless. What does that war for seizing the heavens thing have to do with us? If we're required to go, we'll go. If you don't want us to join, then we won't. It's really not a big deal. They only knew one thing: these people had harmed their brothers and tried to kill their boss. This was an enmity that they would not permit to live under the same sky. Only by tearing these people apart would they be able to vent their anger. Wretched cries rang out ceaselessly. Jia Qingyun roared loudly, rushing madly into the fray. His palms smacked out repeatedly, sending over a dozen beast kings flying. His entire body was drenched with blood, and he charged in front of Jun Moxie and Mei Shuiyan, laughing madly. What are you laughing about? Do you think there's still a chance for you to leave this place alive? Jun Moxie furrowed his brows with annoyance. Haha. I'm laughing about how you're still not aware of your death even though death is already knocking at your door. Jia Qingyun laughed wildly, crazily gasping. His face was savage as he continued happily. This old man exhausted all my Xian Qi to rush here just to tell you one thing. Do you think that the 3 holy lands sent just this one group to deal with you? Ha ha ha. Jun Moxie. So what if you killed all of us today? You will pay the appropriate price for this. Just wait. When you return to Tianxiang, just prepare yourself to send your grandfather off. Ha ha ha. Nonsensical words of a fool. I'm afraid you people still don't have that ability. Jun Moxie scoffed coldly. I know. This old man knows that your mysterious master is residing in Tianxiang. But do you know who's going to Tianxiang? Haha. Jia Qingyun looked cruelly at Jun Moxie. Yes. You are ruthless. And you are decisive. You are emotionless. However, the ones who went to Tianxiang are the saints of the three holy lands. A total of 9 saints. Your master is powerful. But so what? Can he cover the entire sky with one hand? Saint Realm experts. Do you know what that is? Haha, little brat. Do you think that that master of yours is some heaven-shocking character? Even if he's formidable, could he be more formidable than 9 saints combined? Don't look at me like that. I reckon that by now, Tianxiang City's Jun family has already been turned into a pile of rubble. Your grandfather Jun Xie should be nothing but a pile of rotten meat now, emitting a disgusting stench. Ha ha ha. Jun Moxie. This is your retribution. Your retribution. Jia Qingyun clutched his stomach and laughed madly. Mei Shuiyan's face dropped in an instant. Jun Moxie's body flashed and his hand shot forward with a speed akin to lightning. Grabbing swiftly, he clutched Jia Qingyun's shirt by the collar and pulled him forward. Are those words true? Jia Qingyun was already a lamp spent. In order to approach Jun Moxie and Mei Shuiyan, he had exhausted the last bit of strength in his body. There was no resistance when Jun Moxie grabbed him. However, he never intended to resist in the first place and allowed himself to be grabbed by Jun Moxie. Smiling crookedly, he tilted his head and asked, "What do you think? Why don't you try to make a guess? You said you wanted to protect your family. I'd like to see how you'll do that. After today, not only the Jun family, all the families that ever lent the Jun family any aid will be completely annihilated. I'll be waiting in the Yellow Springs for your arrival. I believe that this day will definitely not be far off." Ha 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 ha. His laughter had not yet faded when Jia Qingyun suddenly roused all his remaining Xian qi. His body shuddered violently and a series of explosions rang out from his chest. He had actually destroyed his own 5 organs, killing himself. His body slumped weakly downwards, hanging by Jun Moxie's arm. He had clearly ended his own life. But although his breath was gone, his face still maintained the same evil smile. His deathly gray eyes still shone with a venomous glint. It was as if his hatred had been avenged. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 730. Illusory Manor Emissary. Jun Moxie's face turned dark in an instant. Roaring madly, he lashed out with his foot, kicking Jia Qingyun's corpse high into the air and into the clouds. His eyes blazed with rage and anxiousness, and he commanded, "Kill! End the battle quickly. Use your full force. Kill without mercy." Just at this time, a sharp sound rang out in the air, and a thunderous voice sounded. "Stay your hand." A yellow figure dashed over from the distance as if he were riding atop the clouds. His speed was fast to an extreme, and his voice had seemingly just sounded when he had appeared before everyone. With a schwa sound, he landed in front of Jun Moxie and Mei Shuiyan, shouting loudly, "Everyone, stop fighting." His voice was akin to a thunderbolt, shocking the entire land and causing it to tremble. However, it was already too late. By the time he landed, the slaughter on the ground was already nearing its end. In the instant his voice rang out, and while it was still lingering in the ears of the crowd, the last 2 enemies were already being grabbed in the grasps of Big Bear and Long Crane and subsequently torn apart. Jun Moxie raised his voice, and the Xian beasts returned with their bodies drenched in blood, falling obediently into line. The enemy's resistance had been weakened to an extreme level, and they were facing so many peak-level Xian beasts. Before the Xian beasts could even get injured, the fight was already over. Although there were close to 100 survivors on the side of the three Holy Lands, only 8 superior supreme experts had some fighting strength remaining. However, they were all quickly disposed of by the flood of beast kings and flattened into meat paste. On the side of the Xian beasts, less than 20 had received minor injuries from the attacks of the 8 superior supreme experts. This could be considered a complete victory. The newcomer was a man dressed in yellow robes. His facial features were neat and sharp. His beard was tied in 3 locks which hung across his chest. His hair was jet black, and his face was like jade. He looked refined and cultured, with long and thin eyebrows, causing him to naturally radiate a superior aura. But as he looked at the entire ground littered with corpses, his eyes were filled with sorrow and anger. Turning around swiftly, he looked at Jun Moxie and Mei Shuiyan. Why must you kill? Why must you be so ruthless as to spare none? The instant he opened his mouth, it was actually full of an interrogative tone. Although he was facing thousands of powerful Xian beasts, as well as an expert like Mei Shuiyan alone, he did not seem to be worried in the slightest. Why can't I kill? When battling to the death with an enemy, it is naturally important to destroy the foe completely. If the wildfire does not succeed in burning down the forest completely, the trees shall grow anew with the spring breeze. Jun Moxie took a step forward and stated coldly. Ever since he received news that 9 saint-level experts had gone towards Tianxiang, he only felt an incredible pressure on his chest, causing him to almost go crazy. But at such a time, this yellow-robed fellow actually approached him with such an interrogative tone. In that moment, all the anger boiling in his stomach was vented onto the yellow-robed fellow. But do you know how great an impact the death of these people will have on the war for seizing the heavens? The yellow-robed man roared with rage. You are also a part of the Xian continent. Could it be that these heroes who fought in the war for seizing the heavens before are actually so worthless in your eyes? So worthless that you have to go this far? Heroes of the continent? What does that have to do with me? I only know that they wish to kill me. These are all my enemies. Since they're my enemies, what's wrong with being ruthless? Jun Moxie stared back at him coldly. And who are you? What's your status? And what qualifications do you have to ask such questions? Truly unbridled. You must be the Jun family's Jun Moxie, right? The yellow-robed man seemed to be holding his anger in forcefully. This seat is the misty Illusory Manor's current generation's emissary. Emissary? Never heard of that before. Jun Moxie shook his head with annoyance. If there's nothing else, please leave. This seat still has important matters to handle, so it's inconvenient for outsiders to be present. Never heard of that before? That's because you're ill-informed and ignorant. The yellow-robed man snorted coldly. His self-control had always been good. However, he'd traveled a long way, and his original intention was to stop this grand battle. But who would have thought that after rushing for so long, he would only arrive to see a ground full of corpses? Anger surged through his chest in an instant like an unknown ball of fire. Then, after hearing the roguish words of Jun Moxie, he very nearly could not control himself. Otherwise, with his normal bearings, he would never say these words. After sucking in a deep breath and forcefully controlling his emotions, the yellow-robed man continued. Jun Moxie, you've taken your revenge and vented your hatred. I hope that this matter ends with this. The war for seizing the heavens is right around the corner. Whether it is Tianfa or the Holy Lands, all of them make up the main fighting force of the war for seizing the heavens. You should disregard previous enmities, Live and let live. No problem. Absolutely no problem. Jun Moxie smiled lightly with his eyebrows slightly raised. As long as the three holy lands do not have an opinion on this. This young master will similarly not have any opinions about this at all, absolutely none. Jun Moxie. The yellow-robed man felt his anger rushing upwards again. You've killed nearly 600 peak experts of the three holy lands in one shot, including the biological brother of the elusive world of immortals' palace lord. How could they possibly not have an opinion? The force gathered here made up nearly a third of the combined strength of the three holy lands, yet they had been completely annihilated. Xian cultivation is different from worldly wealth. The yellow-robed man said with furrowed brows. When a poor man suddenly becomes rich, it's an understandable matter if he decides to flaunt his wealth. Even those who cannot understand the poor man's arrogant actions are not necessarily able to do anything about it. But for one who becomes nouveau riche in Xian cultivation, the ending can be very tragic. I hope you remember this point. So you're trying to say that I'm like a nouveau riche? Jun Moxie had a sudden urge to place his hands around this yellow-robed fellow's neck and throttle him to death. If not for the fact that he was unable to see through this person's cultivation, he would have kicked him aside long ago. This bro is in the midst of worrying about his family, but this fellow does not seem to be capable of shutting up. If he was just talking, then so be it. But this fellow was simply giving him a lecture. Who do you think you are? But since he couldn't see through his cultivation, and considering the shocking momentum he displayed when he appeared, Jun Moxie guessed that this fellow's cultivation was definitely not below Mei Shuiyan's and might even be above it. For such a strong foe who was also the emissary of the misty Illusory Manor, at the very least, he couldn't afford to offend him for the time being. You're a nouveau riche. The yellow-robed man said with scrunched eyebrows. You're a complete nouveau riche from head to toe. God. Jun Moxie's hands dropped, and he became somewhat speechless. Just who was this person? To not give him any face at all? Was having a high Xian cultivation and a powerful backing very amazing? Actually, whether it be Tianfa or the three holy lands, everyone's purpose is to grow stronger for the war for seizing the heavens and to safeguard the future of the continent. This seat suggests that the Jun family should make the first move and apologize to the three holy lands. Then, this seat will act as the mediator between both sides and help you all settle the problem. No matter what kind of enmity you all have with each other, it can all wait until after the war for seizing the heavens. This way, everybody gets to reserve their strength. Isn't that a good thing? The yellow-robed man continued with his eyebrows deeply furrowed. Jun Moxie was completely speechless at this. Right now, he heavily suspected that this fellow must have spoilt his brain from too much cultivation. Or perhaps he'd been staying for too long in the misty Illusory Manor and became naive and ignorant to the ways of the world. Aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? Everything will be fine if you act as the middleman? And you'll personally mediate? Who do you think you are? Apologize? The only thing that I haven't done in my 2 lifetimes is apologize. Not to mention, Jun Moxie would never be willing to apologize. And even if he did, the 3 holy lands would never be willing to accept. Could such a heavy loss be so easily forgotten with a word of apology? That was the most ludicrous solution in the world. Mo Wu Dao's little brother had even been forced to death by him. Such a level of hatred was enough for him to be unreconciled to live under the same sky as him. Other than fighting it out, there were no other solutions. Everything is for the sake of the war for seizing the heavens. Everything is for the sake of the people of the world. The yellow-robed man continued sincerely. I hope that Venerable Mei and Third Young Master Jun can consider this seriously. Fortune or disaster, God or devil, everything comes down to one decision. Ha ha ha. Mr. Emissary, I just want to ask you one thing. Have you come here to preserve the strength of the four powers? Jun Moxie suddenly laughed in a cold manner. Yes. The people participating in this fight today all have the power to affect the final results of the war for seizing the heavens. I had to come, the yellow-robed man said. Then, have you gone to Tianxiang City? Or perhaps, did anyone from your side go there? Jun Moxie's eyes were like a pair of daggers, staring deeply into his. We didn't go. The yellow-robed man's face finally turned a little awkward. Carrying the identity of an emissary does not mean that you can bully me. Dare I ask? Do you know that the three Holy Lands sent a total of 9 saint-level experts to Tianxiang City? Jun Moxie's expression was as cold as ice. Do you know what their purpose of going to Tianxiang City is? I do. Fine beads of perspiration had appeared on the yellow-robed man's face, and his graceful demeanor of the past had all but disappeared. Jun Moxie could see very accurately that while this person's Xian cultivation was high, he was not very well versed in worldly matters. Ah, so you did not care about that side because the people there are basically all common people. They do not have sufficient strength to participate in the war for seizing the heavens, and have even less qualifications to affect its result. Thus, you came here only because the people here have enough ability to affect the manpower of the war for seizing the heavens. Your motive was good, noble, and honorable. It's all for the sake of the continent and the people of the world. Am I right? Jun Moxie asked. That's right. It's exactly like that. The yellow-robed man said with a straight face. Feck your mother's common people. Feck your grandmother's safety of the continent. What kind of dog-shut logic is this? It's completely ridiculous and shameless to the extreme. Jun Moxie erupted with expletives all of a sudden. Taking 2 steps forward, he pointed at the yellow-robed man in the face and scolded, spittle spraying out of his mouth in rage. To think that you actually had the cheek to lecture me. Since all you noble people already know of the situation, what have you been doing? Ah, there's a war here and people are dying. But isn't there also a war on the other side? Won't people also die there? Is Tianxiang City not part of your people of the world? And you have the face to come and advise me to put down my hatred? How the feck did you manage to let those words out of your mouth? Just scram away from me. As far as you can go. The yellow-robed man's body swayed, and he took several steps backwards. His face was filled with awkwardness. Jun Moxie, there's a reason for this matter. Besides, this incident was too sudden. In such a short time, how could we consider every aspect? We could only make a hasty choice. After all, this is the more critical area. The results here could affect the entire war for seizing the heavens. It's a pity that your so-called critical battle has already concluded. And the matter that is not important to you at all is the most important matter to me. Jun Moxie snorted coldly and turned around. You may scram. And let me tell you this very clearly right now. If there are any mishaps over there, whether it be the 3 Holy Lands, or the misty Illusory Manor, all of them shall be wiped out completely. This story will be continued to chapter 731. For those of you who are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. The interesting and best stories will be updated. See you again in the next episode.